You have that resolution approval tonight too, don't you?
You guys are good to go.
Good evening, everyone. This meeting of the Zoning Board of Adjustment of the Township of Union is being held pursuant to the Open Public Meeting Law, C-231, Laws of New Jersey, 1975. Notice of this meeting is advertised in the local source and the Star Ledger, the newspapers of record, and notice has been posted on the bulletin board in the municipal building adjacent to the municipal clerk's office. Adequate notice of this meeting has also been posted on the township website, confirming that in order to protect the health, safety, and welfare of our citizens, pursuant to standards promulgated by law to address the coronavirus pandemic, it will be held by online virtual means and telephonically only. Roll call, Mr. Manguso.
Mr. DiGiovanni.
Here.
Mr. Howe.
Here.
Mr. Wiley.
Here.
Miss Alexander.
Here.
Miss Martins.
Here.
Mr. Bentavegana.
Here.
Mr. Irwin is not present. Miss Scott.
Here.
Mr. Champy.
Here. Just a note, there will be no approval of the February 9th meeting minutes. They will be approved at the March 2nd board meeting along with tonight's meeting minutes. Presently, there are no cases to come before this board this evening. However, our first and only order of business tonight is the review of the 2021 Zoning Board's annual report as prepared by our board attorney, Mr. Rob Pansula. It will be carried for a resolution of approval after Mr. Pansula's summation. Mr. Pansula, would you like to begin?
Thank you, Mr. Champy. Yes, everyone had in their packet tonight the resolution, which basically is a compilation of all our efforts from last year. It's required by the municipal land use law. We've done it in years past, so if board members are recurring, you'll be familiar with it. The format is the same, but just for the public's benefit, by way of summary, we only heard 11 cases last year. I guess the combination of the virtual and COVID impacted processes, but that is what we heard, and they are summarized in this resolution. The meetings continue throughout the year virtually, as we've been doing this year, and at least it looks like that's going to continue through at least half the year this year. And public notice will be made once we change that process. I've broken down the resolution into the zones of the area, and as you could see, that most of the activity was in the BA and BB zone. Surprisingly, there was no activity at all in the BC, OB, or I zones, which is certainly a change from years past, certainly for the BC and for the I zone, BC being the Route 22 corridor. So for the BB zone, in the way I did it for the board members' edification, is if the number of cases in bold exists after the variance is described, that means we heard that particular variance that many times. So, for example, in the BB zone, we had minimum lot width cases where it should have been 150 feet. I have 3 cases in bold. 3 different matters had that same variance. And that's really what the town and planning board are looking for, is any type of recurring activity by this board. Most importantly, usually the D1 use variances, because that's the important feature that this board does when someone comes with a use that's not permitted. And the goal of the municipal land use law is to have the town be able to update its ordinances so the developers could be deemed to be permitted. And if it happens enough, that's what should happen in kind. I think as a practical matter, not only in Union, but a lot of towns, what's happening is redevelopment, areas in need of redevelopment are being designated with permitted uses. And then developers are obligated to follow that pattern. And a lot of those cases are going to the planning board for site plan approval and aren't coming to this board. But still, I mean, that process existed in the past, and we've had many more cases than we experienced in the past year. Overall, we only heard 5 D1 variances. We heard quite a few D2 variances, which was the expansion of a non-conforming use that already exists. And that happens a lot of times. We saw it mostly with mixed use in the BB zone. So that's something that we saw recurring. So I did highlight that for the township and for the planning board, because the most common recurring variances is what they're seeking the information on. The bulk standards, even if it's pre-existing, we see that in the residential. That's every year. If somebody puts an addition on the house, they have an existing side yard deficiency, they're building above it. I mean, it's kind of a technical variance. We've held the course with that. I mean, some towns consider that you might be able to develop as of right if you're not expanding the foundation. But I mean, that's up to the town. We take the cases as they're presented to us, and I've summarized them in that very same fashion. But as I said, importantly for the town's purposes, the lack of D1 variances is a good thing. You know, it doesn't keep us busy per se, but of the 5D variances, if you remember, the one in particular was the daycare, which happened to be in a split zone, which included both the play and turf area. So it was kind of technical as well. It was actually permitted for the main part of the zone it was in, but it slided into an RB zone, I think it was. So therefore it needed a D1 relief for that. But I mean, look, by and large, even the pre-existing non-conforming, if they're upgrading, they weren't necessarily adding. So they're kind of technical variances, which, as I sit as an attorney in land use circles, I can report, and this really was the tenor of this resolution I drafted, that's a positive thing. So I did, if you notice in the end, where the now therefore be it resolved, there's areas that I highlighted for the town at least to consider. The residential use in the BB zone, as I said, we've seen certainly an uptick in that a lot of times in the context of mixed use where commercial activity is expected on the first floor. The residential development is happening. There's no doubt about it. So I think the town is working diligently to update the ordinances in that regard. We've seen it. We see the results, which is so far so good. The two other areas I highlighted, and some of it's in relation to that, but others are just standard. You see it over and over in cases, and that is parking, both as to the number of spaces that complement a use and also the size of the spaces. If you notice in the resolution, I highlighted a number of cases where the length or width is deficient, and that's with or without bollards in terms of the size of the parking space. So there's that. There's the number of spaces. A lot of times people need parking space variance relief. And then the final area that I highlighted was signage. Typical to that was the case we saw last week, which, some of the expected square footage for signs wind up being woefully deficient because you have a 10-foot requirement and the size of the building gigantic on Route 22. It really needs variance relief if ever there was a basis to suggest that it could be granted. So that's my summary. This is a pro forma, as I said. It's required. If anybody has any questions of me or need to deliberate beyond what I presented, we can do that. If not, it's set up to be voted on tonight. I can then, or Tiffany and Anthony can take the resolution in its final form and present it to both the Township Committee and the Planning Board, because they are currently in the midst of working with Colliers, our engineers, but with their planning department. And they are looking to update all ordinances. So, and they specifically asked if we could have this to them. That's why we did convene tonight, although we didn't have any other agenda items. I told them since it was a regular meeting night, we could accommodate them. So I thank everybody for kind of circling back last minute off the crazed emails that Tiffany and I sent on Monday. But I did promise short and sweet, and I think I certainly have fulfilled my end of the bargain. So unless anybody has any questions, Mr. Chairman, I think we can make a motion in second and go on with the vote.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Pansula. Well, board members, you've all had a chance to read the resolution. Are there any changes, corrections, modifications, or comments at this time?
None.
Okay. Hearing.
Mr. Chairman, I move that this board adopt the resolution as drafted and dispense with its reading.
I second.
Roll call, Mr. Manguso.
Mr. Di Giovanni,
Yes.
Mr. Howe,
Yes.
Mr. Wiley,
Yes.
Miss Alexander,
Yes.
Miss Martins,
Yes.
Mr. Bentavegana,
Yes.
Mr. Champy.
Yes,
Thank you, everybody.
thank you. May I have a motion to adjourn?
Certainly, Mr. Chairman, there being no further business before us this evening, I move we adjourn.
Thank you. Remember, next week, no meeting, right?
No meeting.
Definitely no meeting, right? No
March
meeting room.
2nd.
March 2nd.
Okay.
Bye,
Thank
Have a
you.
good, have a
night.
good evening.